On the 8th day God created.
Airplanes?
B-51, yeah.
On the 8th day, God created F-4 Phantoms.
Jet engine mechanics.
8th day, God created fighter pilots.
Fighter pilot, right.
Clint Lowe.
Well, I guess we'd have to say created the 178th.
I suppose on the 8th day, probably the Happy Hooligans.
I went to Fargo High, to Fargo Central, to high school. And during that time, the Guard was being organized, 1947. And about a good number of us from Fargo Central, Everett Bruss was one. We joined the Guard in 47. I think it was August of 47. So I was enlisted in maintenance as a so-called mechanic, I guess. Worked for Fred Quam for a while. And he was a Master Sergeant, I was a one-striper. You know, all the senior people were all World War II veterans. So it was a pretty nice time for us young ones to get into the Guard unit.
I loved the P-51 when we were on active duty at George Air Force Base. It was really interesting in the morning when you'd go out there and all three squadrons would probably have about 10 to 15 airplanes running at the same time. So it was just a nice roar, and it was dark out, and you could see the flames coming out of the exhaust on the P-51.
But we had a few cartwheels down the runways and a few belly landings, and one day we picked up 3 airplanes in one day due to problems. It's a good time with P-51s, and still enjoy the sound of one when I hear it.
We'd have to bore sight the P-51. We'd jack it up and get it level, and we had a mound of dirt on the north end of Hector Field, and we'd put the little mirror in the chamber of the gun, and we'd look at it and line it up on the target. But before we would shoot, we had Gordy Grunland would sit in the cockpit. He always pulled the trigger. He was in charge of the armament department at that time. We'd take his fatigue cap and hang it in the center of the bullseye. Then we'd put the rounds in the gun and he'd pull the trigger. And he did lose a lot of caps.
Went to summer camp at Casper, Wyoming. I was in the tool crib, right on the flight line. And of course we had our planes, they were 94s, but I can't remember if they were the A's or B's or what. But anyway, Kenny Getman, one of the pilots, right in front of us, bellied in. And of course, we had the best view. We were in the back of a semi, and it was right in front of us. So, but it went right down the runway, and first thing he ejected the canopy, and it hit the tail of the airplane, which it's not supposed to do, I guess. And that thing was still going, I swear, going 50 miles an hour when he and the RO hit the ground running across the field.
The F-94 was followed by a much larger, longer range, and heavily armed aircraft, the F-89. And the latest version of that aircraft became the unit's first nuclear-armed aircraft.
1962, my wife and I went to a movie theater show, and I was paged at the theater around 9 p.m. and was told to report immediately to the North Dakota Air National Guard. We left the theater. I reported to the Air National Guard and was told that we have 300 Soviet bombers that have passed the North Pole that are coming towards the United States. This has been an all-out nuclear attack on the United States. Armament crews were quickly loading airplanes. We were at that time flying an F-89D that had 104 2.75 rockets. Colonel Becklin and I were the first 2 off. It was an extremely warm day in May, and we used up the whole runway because of the extra fuel tanks we had on board, and they were loaded with rockets, and went up way north into Canada. We held up there for 2 hours and 30 minutes. In the meantime, we got the intelligence that assured us that it was actually some meteorites that had penetrated the radar system.
From there, we moved into the supersonic area with a single-seat F-102 and went from rockets to guided missiles.
102, definitely very good. I really enjoyed flying that. Yes, it was fast, very maneuverable.
I'm Major General William S. Harrell, commander of the 24th NORAD region. The Fargo National Guard is one of the finest units in ADC, if not the finest. In all instances, when I've called on Colonel McDonald, he has responded with only asking how many, which way, and how far.
101 was really the ultimate at that time for the air intercept. It had both the radar and the infrared system. A lot of times you could defeat the jammers on the B-52s and the EB-57s with the infrared, and then upgrade to a radar lock-on and get the job done.
How about William Tell, the first one? Bill Phelan wore his 70-hour F-101 patch, while the Air Force and the Canadians had their 1,000-hour patches on. And lo and behold, we won. Then turned around and won the following William Tell, another first.
I think our excellent maintenance was probably a big surprise to most everybody, because we took pretty good care of our airplanes. That's basically why we won William Tell, is because our airplanes hung together so well.
As you know, this competition was structured and conducted to highlight the capabilities of the best teams. The Bong Trophy winner in the F4 category with 27,434 points is the 119th Fighter Interceptor Group, Fargo, North Dakota.
Well, I participated in 6 different Willie Tells. I flew on 3 teams, and I was a judge down there on 2 William Tells, and then in '94 I was what they called the project officer for it, and that's when we went down.
Yes, your happy hooligans have done it again. They've won the Willie Tell by overcoming formidable opponents.
That missile is already on the rails. You can see this is a very experienced crew, and they're well prepared for this William Tell competition.
It didn't hurt to have a little experience in how they were going to run it and what they were going to do to make sure the Air Force had an advantage. And so we were able to kind of neutralize that.
Please raise your glasses and toast the best fighter unit on planet Earth.
And I guess my favorite F4 story was when J.D. Nelson was flying one day, and Tiny Dura had just joined the unit, and he had been flying T-38s. He flew F-15s in active duty, but he was flying T-33s in Fargo for a while. And when he finally got to get into the F4, J.D. and he went up and did a basic fighter maneuver, a BFM, against each other, and J.D. was not going to get beat by Tiny, and they were up 0.7 hours, and I think he took 3,300 gallons of gas in the F4 when he came back. So that was fun. I enjoyed stuff like that.
The building was built in 1984, and there was a lot of hoopla because before that, we were up at the north end of the airport up there in a little test cell that made so much racket in the wintertime that I remember walking to college back when I was in school, and in the dead of winter you almost had to put your fingers in your ears because of the dense air would make the sound so loud across the entire city. So it was quite a feat to get this facility.
In the years leading up to 9/11, the Air Force was having an issue. They were losing F-16s due to turbine failures. It led to a TCTO, a time compliance technical order, to reblade all of the low pressure turbines in the whole fleet of Pratt & Whitney engines. And for us it meant removing one at a time the engines, from our 22 F-16s plus our 4 spares. Through the process of about 18 months, we were coming right down to the end of it when 9/11 struck. We got all of our motors done and all of our spares. We were able to support that CAP mission over the Capitol.
Today I want to express our nation's gratitude to the Air Guard's 119th Fighter Wing, whose F-16s defended the skies over Washington that morning, In a time of great peril and uncertainty, you were America's first line of defense, and we'll never forget it.
At the awards ceremony, the Happy Hooligans were recognized for their dedication and professionalism, as well as setting the mark for all C-21 units in the Department of Defense. The squadron also made Air Force history by creating a military maintenance program for the C-21 aircraft at the 119th Wing.
I was the original crew chief on aircraft 6-4. Today they're prepping it to go to the museum.
When that last C-21 departs today, we become the only state Air National Guard without a man-flying mission. It's a sad day, as I said, but it certainly is a proud day, because just as General Mack highlighted the decades of success and superiority of this unit, and the men and women of the 119th Wing have proven time and time again that you do it better than anybody else.
The Wing continued extending its extraordinary flying safety record to over 38 years, with 206,667 flying hours and 108,811 sorties without a single mishap.
I suppose on the 8th day, probably the beautiful scenery and people that we get to converse with in our life.
I've been an aviator for almost 30 years. I've flown in 3 different squadrons. You will never experience the camaraderie, the closeness that you will at the Hooligans. The difference between the Hooligan unit and every other unit in the world is everybody on the base is a Hooligan, not just the flyers. The cooks, the mechanics, avionics, weapons, everybody, supply. Everyone is a Hooligan. Everyone is so proud of that. And you will not see that on another base in the United States or anywhere in the world.